Hello, and thank you for joining us today at this extended International Women's Day celebration, Voicing Power, Diane von Furstenberg, and Own It, powered by Cisco. During this event, you will be able to connect with other attendees under the Ideas tab of Slido. You can do so by selecting the Join the Conversation button located at the bottom right-hand slide of your screen, or by visiting slido.com from your mobile device and entering the code #OwnIt. Now, please welcome Jessica Sibley, Chief Revenue Officer, Forbes.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining today's special gathering in celebration of International Women's Day and Women's History Month. This moment represents more than just an occasion to celebrate the achievements of women, past and present. It also represents a call to action to accelerate gender parity and the opportunity each of us holds to push for that progress. Today's gathering is bringing together an extraordinary community of women that spans generations and geography. Joining you today are women from nearly every state in the US and women from 60 countries. I am so inspired by the collective power that you all represent. What's all the more inspiring is that we're united here today by a shared mission to be part of positive change. I want to take a moment to thank two important collaborators today who share this commitment to accelerate opportunities, especially for women. First, thank you to Phaidon for bringing the insights of the world's most influential minds to life through the pages of the books they publish, and for helping to create important convening moments, such as today. I also want to thank our partner, Cisco, who has long celebrated women of impact. And we're so grateful for Cisco's support and their appreciation of the power that can be unlocked when inspiring voices come together for an exchange of ideas and to activate change. There are few people who exemplify the spirit of International Women's Day and this month. None other than Diane von Furstenberg, a glass-breaking entrepreneur and fashion pioneer. Her iconic design from the 1970s, the infamous wrap dress, quickly became shorthand for women's empowerment and has been a coveted classic for generations ever since. After a lifetime of leading her own empire, Diane continues to redefine what it takes to be a woman in charge. And today, we're going to learn about her latest book, Own It, The Secret to Life, which is an A to Z guide around her philosophy that the key to life is owning it. Diane will be joined by co-host Moira Forbes, another leader who has been dedicated to empowering women across her career. In just a moment, they'll kick off the event with an inspiring discussion around Diane's book and her powerful manifesto. Throughout this morning's conversation, you'll also hear from other extraordinary women on how to use their voice, their knowledge, and their experiences to champion change. We'll learn about the work that is being done to close leadership gaps for women and the practical advice that can fuel our own personal and professional ambitions. With that, thank you again for joining us.
Now for our first conversation, Own It, Living and Leading in Charge. Please welcome Diane von Furstenberg, fashion designer, philanthropist, and author, and interviewer Moira Forbes, Executive Vice President, Forbes, and President and Publisher, Forbes Women.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Jess, for that great introduction. And Diane, hello. It is so
Hello,
good to
Moira.
see you. Welcome. First and
know.
foremost, congratulations. I feel like you are always an extraordinary creator, and I'm so grateful that your insights and words of wisdom are now reaching us through this book. So congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to see you again, even though it's virtual. We are at this point used to that. And yes, and I'm very happy to talk about my little book, Own It, which is what I did during COVID.
Well, I want to spend time sort of on the backstory of this because you're someone who people have gravitated toward for the incredible insight and advice that you offer. And you'd said that this book was something you've been working on pre-COVID, but it took on a new tenor and a sense of urgency as we went into the pandemic. It's an A to Z guide with words that really speak to so many dimensions of life. Can you talk about what inspired this book and this manifesto of what it means to own it?
Well, when I launched the In Charge movement about 2 years ago, Phaidon, my publisher, came to me and they said, we do so well with these little guidebooks, full of advice, and people love to quote you, and you have incredible quotes. So would you do a book of advice on being in charge? And so first the book was supposed to be called In Charge. And because we know that in charge is not, even though it appears to be aggressive, it is really a commitment to ourselves. It's owning who we are. And the more I thought about it, and the more I thought, I always went back to owning it. You own your imperfection, they become your asset. You own your vulnerability, it becomes a strength. And therefore I decided, okay, I'm going to call it Own It. And at first it was supposed to be a prose book, and I remember the first sentence was the first sentence was going to be, we do not choose our parents, right? Because that's really, you don't choose your parents. And then I started to write it, and I thought, it's boring and it's condescending. So then I had the idea to do it as a dictionary, and I picked up about 268 words, and in my big diary, every letter had all these different words, and I started to write about. Sometimes it's a definition, sometimes it's an anecdote, sometimes it's short, sometimes it's a little longer, but everything leads you back to Own It, the secret to life. And it was really very enjoyable to do that. And it's funny because, for example, the word that I always want to say was yourself, but then I pulled it all, and it was always us or we or our, because the minute I included myself in it, it was no longer condescending.
I love that, and I love this concept of really turning what you think are your weaknesses and your strengths, or that's where your greatest power lies. Gloria Steinem said about the book, she said, "This book gives us the biggest gift, faith in our uniqueness." And I think sometimes, especially with women, embracing those vulnerabilities or turning those weaknesses into those strengths can be hard to do. It's sometimes the things that seem most simple when you say it are the hardest to do in practice. Can you talk a little bit about how you have learned to do that in your own life? Is it a point that you arrive at? Is it a journey that you're always practicing every day? What advice would you give to others who are thinking about this concept of really embracing and being confident in who they are?
Maybe there's a word at the very beginning. I think it's awareness. And it's almost the second word. Awareness is full presence and consciousness. It is knowing who we are, where we are, and noticing everything around us. It is seeing, hearing, feeling. Awareness is assessing the gratitude of being alive. It is making an accurate, honest assessment of where we are in our journey. As a young girl, I wanted to show that I was strong, so I never smiled much and acted tough. Later, I discovered that showing my vulnerability does not reveal weakness, and that a joyous laugh and a smile can show strength too. As I became more aware, I felt more comfortable sharing who I was. And that is, when you are at the beginning of your life, it's a great trick to have, because you really, you want to be, you want to be respected, you want to look like a businesswoman, you want to do this, and it's fine, it's good. But the most wonderful assets we all have is ourselves. And the more we are ourselves, the more successful we will be. Of course, we have to be the best of ourselves. And, my number one advice to anyone always is the most important relationship in life is the one you have with yourself. Once you have that, every other relationship is a plus and not a must. And so, but having a relationship with yourself means that you cannot be delusional, you have to be completely honest, you cannot lie to yourself. It's very demanding and it's very hard, but it's the best thing to do.
It's great.
And whether it is, and owning it is whether you get diagnosed with a disease, whether you have problem with your children, whether you have a flood in your bathroom, whether you have things that work, whatever it is, owning it is the first step of dealing with it. Okay, this is a reality. So in other words, no blame, no complaint, no shame. Those are no words.
Which I also love in the book is that you include sort of really positive words, but you also choose ones that you don't like, right? Like words like complain, things that we, these sort of negative forces in our life that work against this concept of own it.
I was never allowed to complain. I was never allowed to blame anything, not even the weather. I mean, you're planning a picnic and then it's raining. Well, own it, and you'll do the picnic inside or whatever. It's really programming. At the time that all we talk about is logistics and programming, we have to learn how to program ourselves and how to program our character and our behavior and our handling ourselves so that we have a maximum enjoyment. When you get older, and now I'm an older woman, when you get older, there's so many advantages of it. First of all, you can get away with anything. You could say things that you could never say before. But also you could use your voice, your experience, your knowledge, your connections, your resources. You could use all of that, and it's layers and layers and layers of souvenirs and things that have happened to you. And again, another thing that's really important, if you talk to people, it's not the success that they are interested about. They already know you're successful. But what is interesting and more important, inspiring, is when you talk about your challenges, when you talk about, yes, you all thought that I was on the cover of Newsweek and I was at the peak of my success. Well, guess what? I wasn't feeling that great at that time because I already knew that I was having difficulty. The same time, when people think, oh, no, it's over, she's a has-been. And we all felt like that in life. It may not be true either. So the more honest you can be with yourself, with everything. I know it seems like so ridiculous, but to practice truth is the most valuable thing we can do.
I'd be curious because you talked about when you were younger in your career that that sometimes we all have a tendency to not show those vulnerabilities, and over time that can become a great strength. Was there a turning point for you, sort of when you quote unquote had this realization, or is owning your truth, owning those vulnerabilities, is that a daily practice that a muscle over time has built in you? Because one of the things I loved, when talking about this book, as you said, you talked about some of your challenges during the pandemic, some of the challenges, like many in business with your company and the like, and these hard truths that we all have to face. Is this been a process for you that continues to evolve?
Yes, yes, and it is a daily practice. It is a daily practice, but but again, I go back. The most important thing is that you really always keep the dialogue with yourself, and the dialogue of forcing yourself not to be delusional. When COVID started a year ago, I mean, the fashion business, the fashion industry is going through changes anyway because everything is going virtual and all of that. So when I found myself in this moment where the world all of a sudden stopped, for some reason I said, okay, this is an opportunity. I should really relook, I mean, at the business model and really take a cold look at everything and go back to the core. What is DVF? And so I did, yes, an enormous amount of changes, and I'm still doing it. And I've been in this room for a year, and but it has been, I mean, I'm lucky. It's a big room. I have a garden. So, compared to most people, I've been so lucky. But um, but as I am learning, I always share. In other words, I share my experience, and I did this from day one. I didn't plan to, but it happened because I was a young European princess, and I was selling little inexpensive, cute little dresses, and I would arrive everywhere around the country for personal appearances, and I would meet with the local press, and they all had this perfect idea of the fairy tale and the princess and this and that. And I didn't like that image because, yeah, that was maybe their perception, but it was so much more interesting if I spoke about how I lived it. And so I learned very early on to be slightly provocative. And when you're a little bit provocative, but at least it's my own words. So all of a sudden, when I read the article, they sounded like me. So it's from that moment on that I realized that I have to put myself in the front. I have to share my experience. I have to share whatever happens, because if I share it, I help others not feel conscious about it. So I've been my guinea pig all my life.
I love that, and I love though that you're doing it in service of so many women, and people who look to your advice in your career for inspiration. What I thought was interesting is that you said that this book isn't about being a role model, but giving people a mirror to look at
That's right.
themselves.
That's
As
right.
as you wrote this book, how is it a mirror for you? What did you learn about yourself in this process?
Well, what I learned, I really worked hard on this, every single word. And when you have to take a word and dissect it and give it the direction, give it the definition or the story, it's hard because it's only a few words. So what I learned, what I know how to do with women is I know how to push the button inside women to bring their confidence out. Okay, that's what I know how to do. I know how to do that with a dress. I know how to do that with words. And but what I learned about me is actually, I don't want to be conceited, but at the end of the book, I realized that I have always been incredibly honest with myself, that I don't think I've ever lied to myself. I try so hard not to be delusional, although my children think I am, but I really make an effort not to be delusional. And the other thing that I discovered, which is very important to me because I give it so much importance, to coherence. Your book on your library, the food in your refrigerator, the friends you have, the children you have made, your grandchildren, all of them reflect who I am, my values, what I taught them, my and when I was doing this book, which is like a little mosaic, at the end of it, it all came back to me. And then I say, yeah, I stand by this. It is. And so I felt good about that. But I also think it's a good guide for everybody. It's just, it's like being alone, being alone is not being lonely. Being alone is a privilege. You have time for you. You can think for you. It's all of those things. So hopefully, and the surprise I got is that it's incredibly popular with very young girls, and that's always flattering when you are an older woman and young girls think you're cool.
Well, whether it be your fashion or your advice, it is truly timeless. It is that's sort of the perfect definition. I think it's why it speaks to so many generations. What I love is that you've talked about this through line across your career, whether it be through your words or your dresses or your creative visions, really unlocking the confidence in women. Can you share a little bit of advice to those who spend time with this book and are really sort of wrestling with, if owning it is about embracing your vulnerabilities and turning your weaknesses into your strengths, that requires a confidence that I think a lot of us struggle with. I still struggle with at different moments in my life. What
But
advice?
I do too. I mean, please. I mean, at least once a week, I wake up and I feel like a loser, right? Yesterday, I woke up and I felt like a loser. Now,
Why did you
I
feel like
was.
a loser? Why did you?
I mean, my book was a big poster on Times Square. I was in Good Morning America. I was there. So by everybody's standard, I shouldn't feel like a loser that day, right? Yesterday, but I did. But gradually over the day, I gained my confidence, and I think that when I feel like a loser, I should own it. Yeah, why? And then eventually you just build your confidence. It's and then at the end, what is the most important is like when I wake up in the morning and when I go to sleep at night, I am grateful to be me. And that I have never said it quite as clearly as I'm saying it now. It's quite recent, it's maybe a week, but I really go to sleep now and say, oh, I'm so glad I am me. And it's such a nice feeling. And no matter what happens, you're going to live with yourself all your life. So we may as well enjoy it. We may as well enjoy who we are and get better at what we are. And it's not a dress rehearsal.
I love that. I love that. You're right. It's if you spend all your time thinking of what you're not or being unhappy with yourself,
don't compare yourself to others. Don't compare yourself with others. Like in jealousy, for the word jealousy, I say this one advice: please, 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 never look at anybody's phones. Never look at anyone's computer. Not your children. Not your husband. Nobody. There is nothing good to find. And people have the right to have privacy.
That is true. And in this world, privacy is a little bit elusive these days. You're right. As we wrap up, you've shared some of the things that have been hallmarks of your career and the things that you hope can empower and inspire women on their own journeys. And as I said, you didn't see this book as an opportunity for you to be a role model, but really create a mirror for women. But I'd ask you sort of in closing and take a step back. If people were to look at the story of Diane von Furstenberg, what is the moral of that story? What do you want them to take away from the way in which you've navigated your life and the way in which it's really come together in this extraordinary book?
As you were saying this, I was just thinking, I did some decorating book, but the 3 books I wrote, the first I was 28, and it was a book on beauty, and it was, how to be confident. My second book 10 years ago was Oh, no, I had another one, Signature Life, that was about my business. The other book was The Woman I Wanted to Be, and now it's Own It. And I think that, you know, um, when I was young, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew the kind of woman I wanted to be. I wanted to be a woman in charge. That means that I could pay my bills and I could have a man's life in a woman's body. Later, I became that woman because of a little dress. And what people would say, who do you dress? I say, who is your woman you dress for? And I said, the woman in charge. So being in charge was always that was my fantasy, to be this 28-year-old woman walking in and out of airport, with a little bag. That's what I wanted to do. And now that I am, refocusing on the core of my company, that's what we have a huge archive and we have huge codes. So we're taking all the codes, but I now have a young team, very young team, and they interpret it their way. But the woman that we dress is always that woman at 28, because I never wanted to be a girl. I always wanted to be a woman. And the woman at 28, I'm still that woman inside, you still are that woman. And so it's probably what my wish for everybody and my wish for me and for everybody is, be the woman you want to be. So maybe that's what I should have as my tombstone.
I love that. But I think that is great advice. And again, thank you so much. It's congratulations on the book, but more importantly, for using your experiences, your voice, your knowledge in service to so many women in such powerful ways. So I really love this conversation. I love the book. Thank you again. I know you're going to bring on some guests in just a moment to continue on this conversation. But it was great chatting with you, Diane, and I can't wait to see you in person soon, hopefully soon.
Thank you, Maura.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for always having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
For our next conversation, Unlocking Impact and Empowering Future Generations, joining Diane, please welcome Anne Mira Coe, co-founding partner, Floodgate, and Cleo Wade, poet, activist, and author.
Hello, Anne.
Hi.
Hello, Chloe. Cleo, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Baby, you just had a baby.
I know. Last year. She's so cute. You need to come over and see her when you're in LA next in the backyard.
I know. And she has a beautiful name. She's called Memphis.
Memphis Love.
I love that. Were you a fan of Elvis Presley?
No, I actually I found the name when I was traveling through Egypt, and Memphis is one of the original cities in the world. And it was also where the Ptah people went to worship the arts and creativity. And so I remember when I found that out, I was like, if I ever had a child, I would name her Memphis.
Well, it's a beautiful name. It's a beautiful name. Anne Nura, where are you?
I'm right here.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So both of you, you are how do you call them? You are an angel, right? You're an investment angel. You invest in women. You find, beginning people. I know that you invested early on Lyft, correct?
Yes.
And also Refinery 29. That's what I thought, but I didn't want to be wrong. And so tell me, how is your process? How was it when you started and how is it now?
It's interesting. When I got started, first of all, it was a totally male-dominated industry. And it was something that I was used to. I had come from a PhD in cybersecurity. And so the fact that it was male-dominated didn't really bother me so much, but it was interesting because there's businesses that cater to women and there are businesses that obviously cater to the whole world. and yet the investor base was entirely male. And so what's beautiful about what's happened over the last 13 years is that there's been an explosion of new types of investors who've come into the market. And we've gone from entrepreneurs selling 50% of their business for $5 million at the early stage to now those same entrepreneurs are selling much less of their business because there's so many more investors who are competing for ownership of these companies. So I think there's a lot that's changed on the entrepreneur side, but even on the investor side, there's so many more women that have come into the market that it's really inspirational. And so for me as an investor, I'm not just investing in women, I'm investing in women and men as well. And when I invest in a woman, they know that I'm investing in them not because of that characteristic, but because I believe in their potential in the competition against all entrepreneurs. And for me, that's been really inspirational.
Yes, no, I think so. I think one of the thing is that, for me, I started this in charge movement, right? And so in charge is always the woman I wanted to be, the woman that I cater. But sometimes I find that to be in charge can appear to be a little aggressive. So I keep on saying it's really not aggressive. It's a commitment to yourself. But the other day I was talking to a very powerful woman, and she's very young and very successful. And we were talking about, women and women doing so well and so on. And then I said, we have to be careful. We have to include men as well. And we came up with this idea that I think what is important to bring out, and I think in the next, in the new direction of society, I think it's important to bring the feminine energy. And even when you talk to men, they shouldn't be afraid of their feminine energy. And so that's my new idea. You know what I'm saying? Because, yeah, right? Because you don't want to, we love men. I mean, Cleo, don't we love men?
A lot of them.
A lot of them, right? So we want to be able to include them a little bit. And so I think that the feminine energy is something we should keep present in our mind. You may or may not know I did this book called Own It, The Secret to Life.
I have it on the shelf.
You have it. Right?
I have it here.
I see it. So when I know you, so I know you own it. I know you do. I have met you and known you and seen you in circumstances. But why do you think, assuming that you do, that owning it is the secret to life? Both of you.
Own it is really shorthand for, I think, the intersection of courage and confidence. And so to me, when I think about owning it, I think about what are the practices that we create in our lives as women to cultivate courage, to know the value of confidence, and what are all the things that go into it? Because, as you know, DVF, you don't just wake up and are like, okay, I'm going to be confident today. Confidence is something that is built in all these different ways. It's how we talk to ourselves. It's the people we surround ourselves with. When you surround yourself with people who don't believe in you, and that's why being an angel investor is such an incredible role in a young company's life, because you are the person who helps them cultivate confidence by being someone who believes in them. And so I think, to me, whenever I think of owning it, I think of, courage and confidence linking. And I think that those two things together, mixed with the things that human beings all already have, which are love, compassion, and empathy, that's an unstoppable force.
Well, you are such, you're a poet, and you're a very good poet and a storyteller. And so I feel, and I was thinking, I'm a little embarrassed to show you the book of words, because You are so good with words. Did you like my dictionary?
It's beautiful. But, I love all of your books. Remember, I interviewed you for your last book too.
I remember.
But you're kind of the Gloria Steinem of fashion in the way that you bring, what Gloria is so known for beyond, all of the passion, all of the ways that she brought her passion for humanity into policymaking and lawmaking and really changed, the civil rights of women forever. But she was really known for this ability to create these catchphrases around really complicated issues so that it gave people an entry point into something. And so, you really do the same thing where, it's really hard to define and talk about and storytell women's experiences in business and life and family and all these things. But you give these really beautiful, you give these on-ramps and entry points that feel so approachable and so joyful that it just creates a space for so many more people and women to enter. And I think that is why I literally call you that all the time. I always say, it's like DVF is like the Gloria Steinem of fashion.
Well, that's a huge compliment. When I first came to New York, she was my idol. And when I finally met her, I couldn't believe it. I love Gloria. And also she's so beautiful and she's so sexy and she's still sexy and she's still wonderful and she's funny. She's so funny. She's very, very funny. So Anne, what about you owning it?
Yeah, I mean, I just love the words that Cleo, that you also just talked about, because I think confidence is such an important part of that. And DVF, the way I think about it from your perspective is your fashion allows women to stand out and be unafraid about standing out. And that's something that I think is so important to the idea of owning it, that we embrace the fact that we're different. And each woman, each human has something that's different. And being different is not a weakness. It's not something that you should try to hide, but
it's
rather
hard.
It's something
hard.
that you should celebrate.
Where did you grow up?
What's that?
Where did you grow up?
I grew up actually in Palo Alto, California. So right in the middle of Silicon Valley.
I've never met someone who grew up there.
No, I'm a Palo Alto native.
A rare butterfly.
I know, and I came right back home.
That's good. It's a nice place. It's beautiful. But I mean, did you feel different when you grew up, Anne?
I've always been a little bit different, and I remember my mom described me as this strange child. And, I had things that I loved to do. When kids were rollerblading, I wanted to roller skate. I had things that there are certain books that I loved and I would talk about them endlessly. When I went to college, there were no electrical engineers, but I decided that's what I wanted to do. And I remember my mom, I'd come back and I say, there are no girls in my class. Like I have no friends to make there. And her advice was, why are you making friends in class? You should be learning in class, make friends in your dorm. And so always separating out, like, what is my social life from what are my ambitions? And then finally being able to bring all of these things together. I think that's just been my aspiration. But, my dream was to be able to really have that power. And my daughter's now 14 years old. And when she was 6, she looked at me and she said, are you the most boss? And I said, yes, yeah. I'm the most boss.
When did you, so you did become the woman you wanted to be?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Cleo, of course you did. Cleo?
I think that we're always becoming the woman we want to be. Sure. And that is what makes our journey so fabulous and amazing and exciting. And I think that it's only when we fear change and fear becoming further and further and more deeply ourselves that we really hold ourselves back and society back. I think that, the more free and liberated every single woman is, the more free and liberated a society is, the more we can see each other because we see ourselves more clearly. And so, I hesitate to say I am the woman I want to be because I feel that
I continue to be.
I continue. Yeah. It's a path, you know,
growing into it.
Now, so unfortunately, with the pandemic, there was, well, I should say this differently. Do you know the most dangerous place for women to be in the world?
In the home.
Yes. And that is absolutely terrifying. I mean, the idea, and the pandemic made it worse. I mean, in France, in Europe, a lot of domestic violence everywhere. And because the woman is the nourisher and the woman is the kids and the husband. And so that is something that is absolutely horrifying. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's not something that we can address because it's so dark, but I think it is very important for each one of us to absolutely preach and convince and talk and say to women to express their voice and not allowed to be diminished and not allowed to be bullied and not allowed to be any of those things. And I think that I don't know, I haven't come up with the answer yet, but I would like for all of women to do this commitment that I will not take that. And it's hard because sometimes it is also part of being a woman. You want to be submissive, or you want to be this, or you want to be that, but we can't. We cannot. We are strong. We are stronger. We can save the world. We can make the world a better world. We have to be very careful the way we raise our sons, because our sons, can make a difference. But I think we have to remember that. And that's why whatever success each of us may have had and continue to have, I think it's important to pay attention and to constantly remind people that fear is not an option.
But Diane, I think that something you're so good at is remembering that all women have a voice, and if they're not using it, it's because they don't have the space to use it. And, for someone who makes dresses, you spend so much of your time creating space for people to speak and tell their stories and gather together and meet others and, really rally and organize around important issues. And I think that is so important to remember that if, sometimes you can say to women, like, please use your voice, but using when a woman isn't using her voice, it's because she feels there's no room to speak and say. It's not because she doesn't have something to say. And I think that is so important to remember when we are being activists. It's so important to remember when we are investing. It's so important to remember when we are creating ideas for how to liberate women and help women and be in community with others.
I know.
Yeah.
When I started the In Charge movement, somebody told me I needed micro steps. So it's connect, expand, inspire, and advocate. And both of you do all of that. I mean, Anne, you certainly connect and expand, and Cleo, you certainly inspire and advocate. So you are totally women in charge. And so people always ask, what is your biggest challenge? Or what is it that you had to overcome? And I usually resent when people say that. But what, I should say it a little differently. What, both of you, when did you feel like you had learned how to master yourself and therefore owning it?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think I'm still in that process of learning to master myself. But I think that's part of the joy. It's come in small steps. You know, in high school, I remember there was a moment I realized that I could figure out my potential better than anyone else, even better than my parents. I think, you know, even today, I'm figuring out how to use my voice in any room, in a boardroom, or in a partnership meeting, or in a panel. I'm still learning how to empower my mentees, the people that I'm caring for, the entrepreneurs who I've invested in. And so I think, you know, that process of figuring out how to own it, how to become better, how to find your own personal power is a constant learning process. And that's part of the beauty of it. You discover more beauty in yourself every day.
I know. The adventure of discovering yourself is an amazing journey. And it's a journey that accompanies you everywhere and the whole time. And Cleo, what about you?
You know, it's interesting because I think that for so long, the concept of a woman, you know, mastering herself or, you know, was kind of defined as controlling yourself. And so I think that whether it was this idea that we, you know, controlled what was not presentable in society or what couldn't be successful or what wasn't digestible or what, you know, whether that was not speaking up or being silent or being meek or being overly accommodating or being submissive. And so I think that it's a really interesting journey for women to now think of this idea of having, you know, not control over yourself, but a discipline and devotion to the power that is within yourself. And so I think that for me, when I think of this idea of, you know, the mastery of self, I think about, you know, it being something where I'm not, you know, there are no chains involved. You know, I am not, you know, tethered to anything. I'm actually, it's a very abundant, it's a very open, it's a very freeing experience where I'm able to not only hone my own power, but share it with others. And so but I think it took a long time because I think most of us grow up thinking that like, oh, you know, the mastery of self is this way to be very, you know, digestible and, you know, you'll definitely get the job if you act like this, or you'll definitely be, you know, the type of woman that is, you know, likable if you behave this way or do this. And so I think a lot of it, what the idea of self-mastery was about how to, you know, fit into society rather than stand out. And as we all know, you can't be a leader unless you stand out.
That's right. I love the word provocative. Anne, are you provocative?
I think so. I think that the idea of being provocative is so closely tied to being different, right? It's being unexpected. So as an Asian woman, a lot of people do expect me to be quiet and submissive in a meeting situation. And so I love being provocative just by being different from that expectation.
That's true. And Cleo, are you provocative?
I'm certainly not afraid to be provocative. But, you know, most people who know me know that I'm kind of most of the time more of a listener and an observer than a talker in most rooms. And so I think that I'm, you know, I'm not afraid to provoke because, you know, we don't change hearts and minds without provoking people out of one comfort zone and into a different space. And so, you know, how else do we get people to think differently unless we present something radically different in front of them? And so, you know, how else, you know, as we all know, the change starts at home. It starts with how we raise our sons. It starts with how we, you know, are in community and conversation with our husbands and the men in our lives. And so, you know, without being provocative, you know, provocative is like the, you know, the things you put in the soil to help people grow, you know? And so.
All right. So let's just say, I just thought of that. Somebody asked me that the other day. Okay. Imagine two women in history, in any time, live or not, that you would want to have lunch with. But then as I was going to ask, I say, why don't we just say 2 women and 2 men? Anne.
Oh, I've always so admired the scientist Marie Curie and her path. And so she's immediately the first person who comes to mind, just a pioneer female scientist.
You know, and she's still radioactive.
Yeah, very radioactive.
She's still
and then the other person, you know, this is also historical, is another sort of inventor, Nikola Tesla, who I think was just so interesting as at the inception of electricity to be there, I think would be so interesting.
Cleo?
I think I would choose Toni Morrison. And we're doing 1 and 1. So I would say Toni Morrison and James Baldwin.
Oh, a man and a woman. Okay.
Is that what we were doing?
Well,
or are we doing 2 men?
2 women and 2 men, and she didn't do the 2 men. So give me another woman. My
other woman would either be, it's so hard for me to not think of writers. You know, I think of Octavia Butler, I think of Maya Angelou. I think I would just die if I could sit down with Audre Lorde. So.
Oh, great. Well, we don't want you to die, but all right. And somebody asked me that yesterday, and I said I would love to have lunch with Marlene Dietrich and Mother Teresa. Both women I just think are glamorous and brave and strong and all of that. So that's right. Okay. All right, so I think we have to wrap up. So Anne, Cleo, you are 2 women completely in charge. You are 2 women who own it. You are 2 women that I respect, admire, and love. So thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
What an amazing conversation. Now for our closing conversation, Closing the Leadership Gap. Please welcome Edith Cooper, co-founder Medley, Tiffany Dufu, founder and CEO The Crew, Francine Kitsugas, executive vice president and chief people officer Cisco, and interviewer Maggie McGrath, editor Forbes Women.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you. Earlier in this session, you heard Diane say that she almost called her book In Charge. So this conversation is going to talk about how to get more women in charge. We've seen new data out this week talking about how the pandemic has affected women in leadership and the pipeline to leadership. Women are pulling back from their career. Some third of women told LinkedIn that they're putting their career on pause. A different study showed that there's been a 5% drop in representation at middle management and VP and director levels at some companies. So as women are stepping back from their careers, it's an ever more crucial time to talk about how to close the leadership gap. And joining me are 3 powerful women with amazing experience who will tell you exactly how to do that. So to start, I mean, everyone here has been focused on these issues their entire career, but the past year has obviously been unlike any we've had before. So to set the stage, could each of you tell our audience what you do and specifically tactics that you employed this past year to advance this conversation? And I'm going to start by putting Edith on the spot because you have a new venture as of July. And I think I would love to start us there. So Edith, take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much, Maggie, for having this conversation today. It's so important for all of us to have an opportunity to gather, to really share what we've learned and to learn from each other. As you mentioned, I had the extraordinary opportunity to launch a business in July with Jordan Taylor, my co-founder, who is also, by the way, my daughter. It's called Medley. And we've created Medley because we believe that human beings need space where they can intentionally gather in small groups to explore their priorities across personal and professional things in their lives. We match 8 people with a coach, and they meet on a monthly basis. And originally, we had intended to launch the business in New York, where we live, in person, because we felt that that was critical to sort of that human connection that we all crave. Little did we know, in preparation for our launch in the spring of 2020, that that was not to be. But we had an extraordinary opportunity to contribute to creating spaces for people virtually, leveraging the extraordinary coaches that we'd gathered and interviewed in preparation for our launch. And we pivoted to a virtual model. And it's just been extraordinary. We believed that people needed this opportunity to connect. And we've seen it true with Medley. We also have benefited from the fact that it is virtual. And now we have people from 22 states, 10 countries, not something we'd envisioned, but has really added to the quality of the experience. So it has been challenging, but we have continued to push ahead. And today we've got, a very large membership that continues to grow and will do so over time.
So in pivoting, you've been able to find more opportunity, which is just the type of advice that I think people like to hear, because pivoting can be scary. But I want to turn to Tiffany now. So you've been doing such phenomenal work through the crew. Can you talk us through the last year, maybe one or two tactics that you've been using to push this conversation forward?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. First of all, my life's work is advancing women and girls. That's pretty much why I'm on the planet. So I love specifically International Women's Day yesterday, and also just Women's History Month, when I feel like everybody's joining my party that I am executing on, 24/7. The crew, similar to Medley, matches individuals, but we are focused on women. So we match circles of women who collaborate to meet their life goals together, and we're very centered on what are your goals, what do you want to realize, and how can we support you in moving forward. We needed to raise another round of capital this year. And so we were able to accomplish that. And it really allowed us, very similar to what Edith was saying, to serve more individuals by moving to the virtual model. For us, I've discovered that it actually works better. I was the stubborn person who felt that experiences needed to be in person. But it turns out that for really busy women in the middle, and the crew is very focused on women in middle management and in the middle of their lives and careers, that being able to connect with a group of people on a regular basis virtually does allow for more flexibility. I've seen women nursing their babies during crew gatherings. I've seen women cornrowing their daughter's hair during crew gatherings. So there's no commute, there's no childcare. And I think the flexibility is here to stay, not just for the crew, but I think for companies as well. And I know that Frances will probably talk a little bit about that. So, it's all about listening to who it is that you're trying to serve and making sure that you're meeting their needs. I think that's the most important part of the pivot.
Listening is so key. And Fran, I want to turn this question to you as Chief People Officer for Cisco. You have so many people that you are responsible for. What are one or two tactics that you have employed over the last year to help advance women in leadership into leadership roles?
Thank you so much. So I would say, first of all, that comment about listening is incredibly important. And I think as leaders in any role, we have to understand where our people are at. In my role, I am focused on both our people and communities around the globe. And so what that has meant in the last year is having authentic conversations about what's working and not working, having conversations about the impact of COVID on the communities around the globe, talking about some of the social justice issues, how we as a company are responding to those issues. It has been all about addressing mental health issues. We as a company have been talking about mental health for years. I think that served us well during the pandemic because we were able to acknowledge just how hard things are at the moment. We do our very best to leverage data and insights to understand where our women and men are as it relates to a whole host of issues. I think a lot of what we once considered diversity and leadership work, I think we realized those are table stakes. And it's really how we build off of them and have the real conversations with our people that I think has mattered the most in the past year.
Fran, you just touched on it on my next question in your answer. So yesterday, LinkedIn released some data that showed 60% of working women feel like they are underperforming. And these are high achieving women. And anecdotally, I see this in my life. I have friends who have won awards for the papers they've presented at scientific conferences, but then on group text are feeling so beaten down. The tactical listening and work groups and mentorship are so important in advancing women, but the emotional piece is really important as well. And I want us to talk about that. So I'll start with you, Fran, since you just mentioned it. What specific programs or initiatives or ways have you navigated around the emotional aspect of what's going on right now?
So the first thing that I think we have to do is just acknowledge it, and we have to acknowledge the data. So as an example, at Cisco, we did a well-being survey for all of our employees, and what we realized was that our women scored lower on both physical well-being and social well-being. And that's something that we talk about as a company. Something of interest is that our people leaders also were lower than everyone else. And what I think that means is that caregivers, whether it's in the workplace or at home, are feeling an additional burden. Something that we say at Cisco is that empathy is a superpower. And I think empathy takes a lot more energy. And we have to be really supportive of all caregivers in that regard. It's interesting. On a weekly basis, our employees check in with us and they share their love and their load from the previous week and their priorities. And for many of the women, their loads happen to be concerns about how they're doing as a mother. And I find myself saying to many of the women that work for me, you are a great mother. There's just so much to juggle. And so what we've done as a company is we are pivoting our benefits now to support this way of working. And so what that means, as an example, is providing tutors to our employees and helping them subsidize the costs so that they're able to focus on their work and take care of themselves.
Tiffany, you mentioned women breastfeeding or cornrowing their kids' hair in some of your virtual events, and that's a piece of vulnerability. But what's your perspective from the crew on how to navigate the emotional load that women are under? Because I do think that sometimes when you feel like you're failing, you don't ask for help. You don't attend a virtual event with you or with anyone else on this call.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so important to be connected to individuals who honestly care about you, but are not as invested in your decision making the way that other social categories are. You know, your crew, your medley, group, they're not your friends, they're not your coworkers, they're not your family. These are groups of people whose sole purpose is to support you in what you're going through and dealing with right now. I think that's so critical. And we've had members say, my crew has been my lifeline, because with my family, I'm focused on our economic, difficulties that we're having right now, or with my coworkers, we're all really frustrated with the workload, but I can have a different kind of conversation with my crew. I also think it's important that all of us, even those of us who are, being invited to present at these events, that we have our own strategies in place and that we're transparent and we're vulnerable about sharing them. This is my cockpit. I always have lavender oil that I put on my wrist multiple times a day. I have these index cards where anytime someone gives me a compliment or they say something encouraging to me, I write down things on this index card. I was in a virtual event with one of our members who put in the chat, I feel like I'm sitting through a masterclass in how to be the CEO of the future, right? So the next time I'm kicking myself because I made a bad hire, I'm going to pull out this index card. I just think there's so many strategies we have to put in place ourselves in order to remind us that we're worthy. And like my mother used to tell me when I was growing up, Tiffany, you're so smart. You're so beautiful. You're so loved. I think just the very basics of our self-talk and our messages is part of our mental and emotional well-being right now.
I love those note cards. I have a friend, whenever I text the group text about something good that happened, she'll be like, put it in the compliment book. And the first time she said that, I was like, I don't have a compliment book. She's like, you need one. So note cards, compliment book, whatever you have. I think it is important for those lower moments. But Edith, I want to turn to you. How much does this enter into the conversations you're having with Medley members?
Well, I think that it's critically important for individuals, as both Tiffany and Fran have highlighted, to own their narrative and to understand what the key drivers of their priorities are. As a woman, I have found that there have been times that I've struggled actually with how to balance the priorities of being a mother, a spouse, and maybe a friend for the couple of friends who have hung in with me all of these years, and an executive. And prior to launching Medley, I spent 3 decades in financial services, and I felt so often that I wasn't an extraordinary mom, I wasn't an extraordinary partner or leader, and I was just average at everything. And then I realized that I was actually holding myself to an unrealistic standard, because that's just not possible. And it was because the personal life and my professional life were actually quite separate. I left my personal life. I went into the workplace, and I was Edith Cooper, the partner, versus Edith, the mom. And I think the extraordinary thing that's happened, and that's been accelerated by the pandemic, is that we are now all truly living that blended life, where personal and professional are overlapping. And that's what we're hearing from our Medley members. And I know that's just what Fran shared about the Oracle employees and what crew members are experiencing, that you feel like you can't separate those things, that they're all together. But in reality, what one needs to do is to take the time intentionally to ensure that you hold yourself accountable to being as great as you are in those things when you are focused on those things. I had one story to share. I was on a board call. I was chairing the compensation committee, and there was a woman who was presenting her work. And if anyone has prepared for a board meeting or has attended one, a lot of work goes into those conversations. And so she began to present. You heard a squeal in the background, just of joy. And into the frame launched her 6-year-old, who had just exited from his first day of kindergarten on Zoom. And we on the board, we were so delighted. Isn't this wonderful? I looked at her face. I didn't see delight. I saw shock and just, she was paralyzed. And we said, "Oh, don't worry, he can join the call." And she said, no, you don't understand. I want to go through this. I have my work. I want to get through. And at that moment, I realized that for her, she felt that this was an opportunity for her to share the extraordinary work of her team, and that she felt she needed to decide. And so in that moment, I said, you know what? Why don't we change the agenda a bit? Be there with your son. He's so excited. We'll be back to you in 15 minutes. We'll go further into the agenda. The relief on her face was just incredible, because she felt at that moment she had to choose. And so this accommodation, our appreciation for the experience of what it's like to try to balance those things, has to be greater, and it is greater. And I think that'll set us up for the future.
I so appreciate that anecdote, because I think it shows the importance of empathy from everyone in the workplace, which sounds like a very soft, squishy word, but I think you probably made such a difference for that woman in that moment. And it brings me to my next question, because we talk a lot about the work we can each do personally to help our leadership potential, right? But corporations have a big role to play in instituting programs. So from a very specific and tactical level, I want to start with Fran. What can companies do to support high achieving women? And perhaps what can specific employees do? I feel like sometimes this work falls on certain women, and it is the job of everyone. So I'd love your thoughts on specifically what you're doing at Cisco.
Yeah, happy to share. The first thing that I would share is that when we were doing research years ago on what was most impactful to women as they started their career, what we heard was that they wanted to see role models that looked like them. And I think that's just a reminder to all of us around what we need to build up and down the organization. There are things that we have done at Cisco that I believe started off as a great way to drive inclusion, but in turn actually changed the company. And so I'll give you a few tactical examples. The first is that we ask every leader in the company to be a sponsor for someone who looks different from them, who is different from them. And what we believe is that the leader then learns to be proximate, learns about someone else's experience. And something that I believe strongly in is that when you have all of your vice presidents, as an example, sponsoring someone who is different from them, what starts to happen is the company changes because you have leaders now that are looking out for other people that are different from them. And so I think that's something that's tangible. The other thing that I would say is we put some programs in for our early and career women, and then we tracked promotion velocity and retention. And we found that there were certain programs that had a very significant impact. When you see that, you do more of that. I think pay parity is something that's critical. I think all of our employees want to know that they're being paid fairly. And I think that the next step for us is to look at promotion velocity too. How do we ensure that women are being promoted into the organization? And so these are a few of the things that we're doing today, but it starts with creating an environment where your people can raise their hand if they don't feel that's happening.
I like that sponsor element because that allows people to take ownership. And that's kind of what this whole event is about, right? You have to take ownership of these issues. Edith, you mentioned your 3 decades, which I can understand why it feels like 30 decades. I think the pandemic has changed all of our perceptions of time, but you do serve on public boards. So from that perspective, what are tangible things that people working within large organizations can do to look out for high achieving women and make sure they're getting the opportunities they deserve?
Well, I think we could use the framework that Fran shared and what she's created with her team at Oracle as guiding frameworks. First of all, you have to pay attention to it. And in the same way, you have an audit committee that ensures that the financials are appropriate, and the other committees are focused on aspects of the success of an organization. Boards are responsible for ensuring that organizations focus and prioritize diversity and inclusion broadly defined. And by that, I mean that, we need to look at the data. We need to consider the experience of everyone at the company and realize that culture really is an organization's ability to take individuals, connect them, and orient them towards achieving the company's goals. And I will just say very directly, an organization cannot be extraordinary if they don't have difference broadly defined, period, full stop. Those are guidelines, but the reality also is that we need to really own our responsibilities as leaders from the boardroom, in executive leadership, and quite frankly, in our own individual behavior, to creating an environment where everyone can perform to their potential, because that is really the key. Empathy, caring, and understanding someone else's perspectives are not soft. It's the core of organizational success. And thankfully, we have organizations within companies. I would have a shout out for HR organizations, but also people like Tiffany, who understand the isolation and onlyness that women experience, and have created opportunities for women to gather and share and gain the confidence that they need as women to be with each other. That's what we're doing with Medley as well. So you can almost take the same dynamics that we're creating in Medley and in the crew and within large organizations and ensure and make sure that we're living up to the expectations that our employees will demand.
Had so many conversations over the last few months about how important networking is now and how much easier it is on Zoom than it was before when you're in a cab going somewhere. But a lot of the conversations I've had talk about how people tap the people they know for boards. So if you don't know people already on boards, how can you get on the board? How can you advance your career? So I do want to make sure we talk about the networking element. I want to bring Tiffany in. What specifically can women do to diversify their community of advisors and mentors and sponsors in this moment in time?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And part of the reason why I founded Crew is because I took that question for granted. I have to admit, as someone who is the cumulative investment of a lot of women and always had mentors and sponsors and who had a crew of individuals, it wasn't until January of 2018, I was having a conversation with a woman who was like, Tiffany, I understand this idea of having this crew. You want me to have this board of advisors, but I don't think you recognize the work that goes into finding this group of people. And then she walked me through the workflow. And I realized that really the challenge that we can tap into is taking the work out of the networking, which is why I value the crew, which was why Medley is probably doing really well. So, that's one strategy, is to apply to a network that's going to match you and is going to expand your network. The other is that I found LinkedIn these days to actually be a really helpful tool. I've said yes to people who have reached out to me on LinkedIn in ways that I wouldn't have before, because the friction, the barrier to connecting with them is so much simpler. It's so much easier for me to hop on a Zoom for 15 or 20 minutes than it would be for meet someone for coffee or for tea or for lunch. But I think the most important thing right now is to have clarity about your purpose in reaching out to people. What do you need from people? And not be afraid when someone says, how can I help you? To say, I'm actually trying to amplify my book, or I'm looking for a new role in X, Y, or Z. I noticed that in your LinkedIn, you're connected to this person. Would you mind making that connection or introducing me? The specificity with which, given everyone's time, which is very limited, that you can be clear about what you need and ask for what you need. Empathy is your superpower. Vulnerability is your superpower. Asking for help is your superpower right now.
I love that point on specificity. I couldn't agree more. I think we are running close to time, so I want to pivot to a question that's forward-looking. We're now kind of approaching a time that's not quite the new normal, but we're getting vaccinated. We're thinking about returning to the office and maybe thinking about returning to in-person events safely, of course. So I would love for each of you to share a goal you have for the work that you are doing, and a goal you have or a tactic you want our audience to employ. And I'm going to put Edith on the spot first.
I believe that at the core of every human's responsibility is to recognize and understand, or seek to understand, someone else's experience and how they can positively influence that. Positive human interaction is an opportunity to learn and grow. And to be honest, it really has fueled my soul for decades. And I want, after the experiences of the last year, for us not to forget the pain and the suffering of the pandemic, which highlighted inequality from a healthcare perspective, the uprising again on racial inequality, and human beings' interest and intrigue in what they can do personally to change the trajectory of the experience of Black people. And I aspire that people understand the benefit of having a medley, a crew, or being part of an important organization, and their role, therefore, they play in using their voice, in having expectations, so that the role of companies continues to evolve, not only with the goal of benefiting, the bottom line and shareholders, but also understanding that by embracing everything that we've talked about in this conversation, their relevance and their ability to grow and be important organizations in the future will also grow.
Fran, I turn to you because in the green room, the digital green room, we were talking about how women might prefer to work from home, but they also want to be seen at work. So as we think about the new normal, what's one tactic or goal that you have for everyone?
Interesting, because every single company at this very moment is thinking about how they will work post-pandemic. They are thinking about how many people they will have in the office. They are thinking about whether or not they want their people in part-time, full-time. And what I would hope for is that as we are having those basic conversations about hybrid work, we absolutely prioritize the conversations about inclusion and equality and fairness. I think if we put effort in this space right now, we can create a leapfrog. And as we are changing the way in which we work, let's see all of our employees and the issues that are going on. And so I think there's just a call to action to have these discussions now.
And Tiffany, I'll go to you for final words. What's your goal or tactic for yourself or our audience as we head into the new normal, as I think I'm calling it now?
Well, one of my privileges is what I shared at the top, which is that I already know why I'm on the planet, to advance women and girls. I know what my tombstone says. It says she got to as many women as she could. So my aspiration is that every woman needs a crew and that she has one. I think right now, and Edith, spoke to this around clarity of what really matters most to you. That would be my aspiration for anyone who is listening. Usually when I ask that question, women will say, well, my career matters to me, my family matters to me, but I'd love for us to dig deeper. And this is a moment to do that, where you really ask yourself, what do I hope to achieve in relationship to what matters most? And if you're still searching, a very tangible exercise is one made popular by Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He encourages us to all envision our funeral. And I think it's a very prescient exercise given the fact that so many people are losing their lives right now. Imagine a family member, a friend, a coworker eulogizing you. What would you want them to say? You probably don't want them to say, she got a lot of stuff done on her to-do list. You probably would want them to say something more substantive and meaningful. And I think that exercise can help us get out of the trees that can be very overwhelming and anxiety producing right now and into the forest of what is the impact that we can all make in the world. And that's my aspiration for everyone who's listening.
Well, that is an excellent point to end on. What is the forest of impact we can all have? You have made an impact on our audience by speaking today. So thank you so much for joining me. And thank you to all of you at home who are watching. To close, I want to tell you a statistic that I learned recently. Berlin Cameron has proprietary research they shared with Forbes ahead of International Women's Day that says that 73% of women believe that regular citizens have the biggest role to play in advancing gender issues. And what I love about this statistic is that it shows we all know we have the power within, but this statistic shows that we really do believe it, and we think others do too. So International Women's Day and Women's History Month is just a moment in time, but I really hope you carry these conversations forward through the whole year and many years to come. We have a lot of work to do, but I think the women who have spoken to you today have done an excellent job of articulating just how we can do that work. I want to thank our partners, Phaidon and Cisco. I want to thank Diane von Furstenberg. And if you are interested in getting her book, Forbes will be following up with more information following this event. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for reading Forbes, and have a lovely rest of your day.